Thank you all very, very much for the chance to be here. I've admired this brave organization at a distance. When I found out there was an organization that in some fashion was committed to free institutions and in a general sense to those principles we currently term conservative in Maryland, I was curious. I mean, what a noble endeavor. Right? I mean, I discovered traveling in from the airport with Ellie that he's not a native of the area, so he came from Philadelphia and summoned by his bride to her native state. That may explain he didn't know what he was getting into. But I choose to believe it's just that he's an intrepid person, not to be deterred by the shall we say, difficult politics of this state. I've suggested to Ellie that for his next venture, he might try an Indianapolis Colts fan club. See how since he's willing to take on the toughest of causes. See how you do with that. It was awfully nice of Ellie to arrange a Presbyterian. I don't know if you knew this or Reverend Boyles, because you knew that I'm one of that fallen and dwindling minority, but that was terrific. You know, all the best Presbyterian jokes are either cheap jokes or predestination jokes. They all fall in one of those two categories. Reverend, my former preacher used to say a Presbyterian is someone who falls down a flight of steps and says, "Well, I'm glad I got that over with." And I'll come back to that a little later because I think there's a tendency in our public life today, and a tendency among people who might share generally the views of folks in this room, to be a little fatalistic about the situation we're in and the nature of our politics and even our fellow citizens. And I think that's wrong, and I think it needs to be contended with. So when I'm done being frivolous, maybe we'll talk a minute or two about that. I made some nice friends tonight. There's a couple here, the Bows are here from Illinois, right? They're still here? Yeah. Enjoyed talking to Barbara and John, wasn't it? Peter, sorry. Peter and Barbara. They invited me to come to Illinois. Now, coming to Maryland is daunting enough. I really just need to stay out of Illinois. They're our neighboring state. Love them. Love to raid their businesses, which is getting easier all the time. But I get myself in trouble every time I'm over there. I was over there on the day of the Olympics decision. And all of Chicago thought they were going to win. I mean, there were fans, T-shirts. I mean, it was a festival atmosphere when I had down. We were for them. We had said that we would like to help. The northwest corner of our state could have hosted some of the events. So mid-morning, there's a big shock when Rio wins. And I'm speaking at a luncheon and forum, something like this. I talked a little while, took some questions. Guy sticks up his hand, asked me what's my reaction to the Olympic decision. Well, not my thing, really. I didn't know what to say. I said, just off the top of my head, I said, "What is this world coming to when Chicago can't fix an election anymore?" The governor over there did not take it well. Felt a little badly about that one. And then, they're in an incredible financial pickle over there. They're 6 months behind on their bills. They're borrowing to pay back the bills they can't pay. Raising taxes again for the fourth or fifth time. It's one of those difficult state situations. And when they announced they were raising taxes again, somebody called me up, and me and my big mouth thing, I said, it's like living next door to the Simpsons. Yeah, a dysfunctional family down the block. And he didn't like that one either. So, I was over at Putnamville Prison. I visit as often as I can. All the people working for the people of Indiana, and I've spent a lot of time visiting our correctional facilities, thanking the brave people who work there, talking to some of our guests too about their lives and how we hope they'll learn something while they're in there, sincerely. They won't come back. And I was over to a little town called Putnamville for a graduation of some people who've gone through a character building, more or less boot camp that he put together. It's got a pretty good record, lowering recidivism rates as graduates. And Warden gets up, says, before we get started, I've just got to tell you all that we've never had a governor. So I've worked 25 or 30 years. So I used to be the warden up at Michigan City. It was built under Abraham Lincoln. He's the first governor that ever visited there. He came twice. And this is the second time he's been here to Putnamville. He goes on and on about how much they appreciate it. So finally, it's my turn. I get up and I said, Warden, thank you very much. You're very kind. I said, but you're making way too much of this. In Illinois, the governors go to prisons all the time. See, I know there are a lot of Maryland jokes. I just don't know what they are. On the poor folks that close to us. But anyway, thank you for this great opportunity. When I honestly didn't know about the club, and understandable, it's not that old, but I did quickly see your pedigree and some of the illustrious people, including some close friends of mine who are on your national board or your non-Maryland board, and I was very gratified to be offered this opportunity, and Ellie was very patient and flexible in working with me till we could find a date to come by. And one great treat was an old college friend that I have not seen in 40 years is here tonight, my friend Bryson Cook. And I walked in the little room over here, and he walked right up and said hello. And I said, Bryson, man, I said, great, after 40 years, I didn't even know if you'd recognize me. Bryson said, well, to tell you the truth, I'm not too good at faces, but I never forget a suit. I told you I was Presbyterian, right? The diplomats sometimes say, I come instructed. All right, I come instructed in a little way tonight. I tested Ellie on this more than once. He has asked me to say a few words about our experience in Indiana. I generally do not do this. First place, we tend to look forward, not in the rearview mirror. In the second place, particularly when I'm with people of any other state, I always say talking about your state to anybody else is like showing them your home movies. Like they pretend to be interested, but they're really not. But let me just, in rapid fire fashion, tell you a few of the things that we have been through in the last few years. I hope not to impress anybody, but just to make a larger point when I'm done. We did arrive in a situation which our state was bankrupt by any fair definition, and this was 2005 when most states were doing just fine. Economy was strong, most states were flush. For various reasons, ours had been spent into a bad situation. A few years later, we're in the black. We've paid off all the debts. Our debts have been paid down 40% when the other 49 states' debts have increased, coincidentally, by 40%. We are AAA credit for the first time in our state's history. Compound growth rate of state spending for our 6 years, when our sixth fiscal year closes on June 30th, will be less than 1%, which is 1/3 the rate of inflation. So we now move down the list. We have last I looked, the third lowest per capita spending in the country. And as Ellie said, the fewest state employees per capita. And it has allowed us to say now with some assurance to people, you'd be amazed how much government you'll never miss. I mean, but there's more to be said about that, because the mission, I think, of Friends of Freedom is not merely to make government small. That's only part of the task. In 2008, we passed the largest tax cut in state history. We've never raised any taxes, with the single exception of the tobacco tax, which funds the biggest HSA program for poor people in the country. We never asked for a nickel of extra taxation to address the operating bankruptcy, the fiscal problems of the state. As a consequence of that tax cut, we have the lowest property taxes in America. Don't know how you're doing here, but most places I can make folks jealous by telling them that in Indiana, you will never, again, we also constitutionalized the cap, so we cut them and capped them. And you'll probably be paying less, but you can never pay more than 1% of the market value of your home. So a penny on the dollar is the absolute maximum from now on that any loser will ever pay, which is, by the way, lucky timing. Came in very, very handy to a lot of people when the bubble burst and the economy fell and housing market took such a hit. We effected the largest, this is a word I don't use, but because it's in common usage, the largest privatization of infrastructure in American history by a factory of two. We had two deficits really when we got there, when we looked at it. One of them was the operating deficit of state government, spending more than it was taken in and borrowing to cover. But we also had, as our nation does, a tremendous backlog, a second deficit, so to speak, in the capital stock of the state, roads and bridges. And really important to a state like ours, the nickname of our state is Crossroads of America. It's a big, big selling point for us in trying to bring business. You can reach 2/3 of the American population in a one-day truck drive. And so a crumbling infrastructure is an even bigger problem for us maybe than for some others. In a story that's fun to tell, but I'll leave it aside at least until the Q&A. We, through some lucky timing, and I like to think savvy business sense, collected almost $4 billion of free cash, no taxing, no borrowing. We're reinvesting every penny of it in new roads, over 200 projects that would never have happened otherwise. And the source of the money was a lease of an existing toll road, which is getting $4 billion of investment in it. It's in better shape than it's ever been in its history. So a pretty good win for the people of our state. In 2007, we accomplished the biggest deregulation of telecommunications in the country. Any one of you could go into business in our state in about 3 days without having to slog through some licensing process and buy up a bunch of local support and all that has typically gone with that in the past. Last Friday night, we finished our seventh of the 8 General Assemblies, legislatures to which I will take proposals. And once again, we took some we thought were consequential, important for the future of Indiana. And we had, in my opinion, a good season. We passed another very, very tight budget that will not only preserve our reserves, but will restore them, bring them back well over $1 billion on a $14 billion base. We will have, having discontinued collective bargaining on my second day in office by public employees, we have now passed a law that makes it impossible for a governor to bring them back by a stroke of the pen, as one of my predecessors. There's a big story in that too, which I can tell later if anyone's interested. But one little thing, just so you'll know, after great thought and reflection and hesitation, on my second day, I did end collective bargaining. And yes, it did lead to massive savings. It was a major portion of the fiscal recovery that we were able to bring about because we were able to set aside 160 pages of do's and don'ts, mainly don'ts. That basically meant you couldn't move a copying machine from one room to the other without the union's permission. And so kind of particularly outsourcing, restructuring of departments, combination of functions, centralization of things like procurement, and IT, and personnel, and these kind of things. None of that could have occurred. The only other direct consequence, by the way, aside from more effective and leaner government, was that without any prompting at all, within a few months of my terminating that executive order, 92% of the state employees quit paying the union dues. Once it was a matter of their free choice, we had, you could say, a little referendum, and freedom won. The other thing that happened last Friday night that I may look back on later and decide was as or more important than any of the other things that we've gotten done was a top-to-bottom transformation of public education in our state. Something I had feared would be one big goal we would never quite get accomplished. But just to sum it up, we'll now have the freest and most open charter school arrangement in the country. All the discrimination is over. The charter public schools will be paid in full, paid on time, have access to buildings, all of which they've been denied in our past. We'll have a lot more of them because there'll be more entities, including, for instance, private universities that are able to charter them. We have narrowed collective bargaining by the teachers union to wages and benefits only. They will not be able to run the school systems through the contracts, which has been the case in the past. I've got a 6 or 7 page list of examples of the sorts of things that are in our current contracts. Things as almost silly or trivial as what color the teacher's lounge will be painted, what the humidity in the building will be, on up to more troublesome things like how many teacher meetings the principal is allowed to call or on what days they're permitted to be, on to things that are really troublesome like the principal cannot enter a classroom to observe teacher performance without 3 days, 5 days, 7 days notice.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that is now a thing of the past in our state. And then we have having already changed teacher licensure, the young people now planning to be teachers in our state will no longer be able to get a license with an education major. They will have to actually have majored in some kind of content. It's a novel idea that if you want to teach history, you might want to know a little history and math and so forth. But that was accomplished administratively. Last Friday we passed a bill, and Saturday I signed it, that does what people literally from probably most in this room to President Obama, let's give credit where due, have been calling for. And in the pursuit of teacher quality, the decisive variable, statistically, 20 times as important as whatever's in second place. From now on, a tenure will be earned by positive performance evaluations, not by living an extra year or putting a neighbor on the wall. Meaning merit pay for those teachers who really do a good job of growing, that is, advancing the learning of their kids. The teacher we seek in Indiana to honor and recognize and reward the very most is exactly that teacher who takes the toughest classroom around, the kids who come from the homes where education is not revered, the kids whose lives are going to be forfeit if we don't find better ways to help them realize their potential and helps them grow the most. We can't do enough for that teacher. From now on, we're going to find them, we're going to pay them more. And then finally, the largest voucher program in America. 60%, the lowest income, 60% of Hoosiers will be eligible if they have tried the public schools and found them not satisfactory for their child to direct the funds on a means-tested basis. So the lowest income folks, 90% of the money we were going to spend, and direct it to the non-government school of their choice. So we will be now the first state of full and universal choice, public school, charter school, and private school in America. And can't wait to get started. I'll give you those illustrations. I promise you not that because I prescribe them for Maryland. Marylanders will have to decide. We're pretty bashful about saying that what we think works well for us works for anybody else. But to make this point, in our state, the Republican Party, we have styled ourselves the party of purpose. Our view of public service, I hope is compatible with that of each of you, but maybe has a little different emphasis certainly than I see our brand of politics practiced some other places. We believe in government that is limited but active. Our most avid detractors would, I think, tell you that whatever else we are not inert. We are in motion in our state. We are always trying things that we believe will make life more successful, might make life more promising for the people of Indiana. We believe in government that is limited but excellent. There are people I know, people of very good will, who are passionate about bringing government back within the limits that our founders had in mind, but not attentive enough, I think, to the additional obligation for those who believe that way, to make sure that the government's left really delivers for people. So we measure everything, and we reward people in state government based on their performance. We know the customer satisfaction rating of the people who visit our parks. We know how long it takes to get a tax refund back to you. It's half as long as it was when we got there. We know, probably the most visible example to Hoosiers, are you guys happy with your licensed branches in the state of Maryland? Is it a point of pride? I don't know. Most places know. Ours used to be nightmare in Indiana. I used to say that Hoosiers went to the license branch with a sack lunch and a copy of War and Peace and hoped they didn't finish both of them by the time that somebody called their name. After a very interesting project over several years, our branches, our Bureau of Motor Vehicles, as the first to win the National Best in Class Award 2 years back to back. You walked in one today, a Walmart greeter type person would say, "Mr. Gold, welcome. What's your business here?" You tell him. He says, "Oh, well, you want to see Mr. Cook on line 3. And when Mr. Cook gave you your receipt, it would be printed right under the dollar. The cost of what you did would be the minutes and seconds that you were in there. And the average visit time in an Indiana license branch last month was just under 8 minutes. And the point I want to make is that I think there's both a great responsibility and an opportunity for people who argue, as perhaps most people here would, for a much more limited sphere of government activity. I think it's very important to try to make sure that the government that is left performs well for people. Number one, it's just as solemn a duty, I think, as keeping government in bounds. And number two, I think it builds credibility for the next set of reforms that you might want to propose. Last point I will make: the way we look at government in my state, and I think it's consistent with the spirit of the matchless president that you're honoring with this recognition. We believe that public service is what people of goodwill do to make certain that the important parts of life flourish. Important parts of life being the private sphere, the private realms of business and family and nonprofit organizations and voluntary associations. Government, as we see it, ought to be active on behalf of clear and fair rules and on behalf of creating the conditions whereby men and women of enterprise and ingenuity create wealth and better lives for each other. That's a very different view, I believe, than what prevails nationally today and in too many, I guess, states of our country. You know, almost not a day goes by that I'm not talking to a business about coming to Indiana or growing in Indiana. We set ourselves out from the very outset, and we defined this, the growth of income in our state, as our objective. Everything else we do is just a means to that end. Balanced budgets may be a duty, but they're not the end of existence for us. It's about keeping, you balance budgets so you keep taxes low. You keep taxes low so we can steal business from Illinois where taxes are high. So it's so common. If I've been visiting with a business who has some issue or question or a suggestion to make, on their way out, they'll almost always say in some variation, oh, by the way, so what can we do? What can we do to help the state of Indiana? I always say the same thing. Make money. Why don't you go make money? If you succeed and make money, then you'll hire somebody else. Or you'll pay the people you have a little more. And you'll have some money left over to help the nonprofits we're so proud of. The first duty of corporate citizenship, we think, is to succeed, compete successfully. I think that view is very much at odds with a sincerely, devoutly held view by many, including those who have been successful in our recent national elections, that American people really aren't up to the task anymore. They're not, life is too complicated for them. And they need the beneficence of their tender-hearted betters to help them deal with their credit cards, their mortgage decisions, their health care selections, where their children go to school. And I don't doubt the altruism or the sincerity with which these folks approach public issues. But I dispute strongly that these are the Americans that we are today. I don't think this is the kind of people that we are. And meanwhile, there are people who might agree with the folks in this room about the large public policy questions that we all wrestle with, who I also hear, perhaps unintentionally, doubting the capacity for citizenship of our fellow citizens, doubting that we are still the Americans who build things, invent things, work hard, plan for the future, save for our children. Awful lot of that talk going on. People want to remind you that how dependent people are on government and all that sort of thing. I don't think we can surrender to the idea, we mustn't, that Americans are no longer either fit for economic and material success, or for the kind of citizenship it's going to take to help Andy and others make the difficult decisions that we have to make now, square ends and means, or means and ends, I should say, make ends meet in this country, discipline ourselves and therefore our debts before they undo the American project. It's going to be a very important test that we all have to participate in. I can't prove to you that Americans will rally to a program that restores and reaffirms the American dream. I just know that Ronald Reagan brought us to such a moment at a time that was just as daunting as this one, for those who can remember that far back. And I know that worry with us tonight, he wouldn't accept for a moment that Americans can't belly up to these so-called tough decisions. I think what he would say, one thing I know he'd say is that if we simply make the right choices, we simply grab hold of our problems, as Americans historically have, there's no stopping us. There's no country on earth you'd trade places with, provided we make the choices that are in front of us, that we take the actions, perfectly sound, practical actions that are there for us to take. So, I thank you so much for your fortitude and coming together as an organization in this difficult precinct you're working in. I thank you for your commitment to principles that are timeless and will always be of application as they are to the new problems of any age, this one or any other. And for sharing your hospitality with me. Had a great time, and I'm looking forward even more to your leading the rest of this discussion through your questions. Thank you very much. You've had a stretch. Yes, sir.
I have a question. Can you tell me your first reaction to what does it mean to hear that you're going to get Medicaid, state block grants for Medicaid? What does that mean for the governor? How do you adapt?
I'd love to get that news. You know, I mean,
if that were to happen.
If that, you mean if that were to happen? No, I think it's exactly the right thing to do. It's a little bit of it's a little bit of a gamble, I guess, but it's a gamble that most governors would take in a flash. To be free of the mandates, the encumbrances, the restrictions that the federal government places on the states, and take the chance that at a very modestly rising amount of money, you know, inflation or medical inflation or some sort of thing, as opposed to the open-ended system of the day, I think it would, we'd certainly take it in our state, and the majority of my counterparts would also. I'll tell you, it's a little discouraging to be on these conference calls where governors are talking about this, and many of our counterparts are just hemmed in by partisanship. You know they would rather do it this way. They'd rather have the option themselves. But we can't get agreement to say so because they don't want to be disloyal to an administration that believes that's a terrible idea. And I told a couple of them the other day, I said that it's dispiriting for some of us to hear you say what you do, because what it means is you're saying you'll take good care of low-income people in your state, but you don't trust us to do that. I'd love a chance to prove them wrong. You know, if it ever happened, I mentioned very briefly that Ellie mentioned that our state employees, 5/6 of them now, voluntarily are in an HSA consumerist healthcare program that I put on the menu in our first year, and it's grown. When we created a program for the near Medicaid population, we have a pretty low limit in our state. We had a lot of uninsured people. We did want to do something about it. And it is HSAs for poor people, roughly speaking. And it is proving that they are just as capable as anybody in this room of making their own decisions. Once it's your own money, right? You know how HSAs work. Once it's not free anymore, free in quotes, people at all stations of life, our state employees are not exactly, you know, affluent, most of them. They're paid less on average than the average Hoosier is. But they're very discerning about it, and we've got the data now to prove it. Our healthcare costs are double digits below, in those programs, double digits below those who are still in the old traditional programs, adjusted for, you know, who's in which plan. And why? because they ask the questions that a good consumer would now that it's their money, visibly their money. So they ask for generic drugs more often, and they go to the emergency room only when they really have an emergency, and they occasionally get a second opinion before they venture into a very expensive procedure. And if Medicaid were block granted, I think you'd see a lot more of that going on. Yes, sir.
As I kind of look at, the 2012 elections, and the budget issue obviously is huge out there, and Medicaid block grants, is one of the big issues. Seems to me the other two are the public employees and the pensions, the unfunded liabilities there, which obviously the Democrats will grab onto and get all the union support they can to oppose any Republican, who's against that. But the other thing is Medicare, and on the Medicare issue, which I think is a huge flashpoint for the Tea Party, which has been predominantly, we have to admit, a lot of folks like me near or over 65. And so far there's been a lot of pushback against, maybe it's because of lack of education about Ryan's plan, which I think is the right way to go, because
right.
We actually, again, got to get the elderly or near elderly to get some skin in the game, realizing that, if you take better care of yourself, it's likely you're going to get a lower, premium contribution to Medicare in the future. But it's totally a method to this situation now, and I'm just afraid that the near elderly or elderly are going to oppose that would become a flashpoint that the conservatives are going to lose on against Obama, and may bring him back into office.
Well, I guess the president agrees with you. I was very, very disappointed at his Georgetown, I think, speech. I thought maybe he was going to step up to this and seize this issue.
Yeah.
He's in a lot better position to do it, frankly, than any Republican for the reasons you just gave. These old stereotypes and cheap shots that have worked very effectively over time. We're going to hear them all. I know this.
Yeah.
So when I was talking about it, having the faith that the American people can make and support big change and make adult decisions, this is probably the best example. Your question is the best example you can talk about. Now, I think we have to develop a vocabulary for talking about it. I'll tell you how I like to approach it. I mean, first of all, I think Ryan's exactly right. You say to all those in or anywhere near the program now, we're not talking to you. You are good to go. Nothing will change. Probably have to say it 1,000 times because someone will be, running ads saying you're going to lose this, lose that. No, I'm sorry. You're talking about somebody else's plan. In our plan, a deal's a deal. Now, we're going to need a Medicare 2.0 so that younger people, your younger brothers and sisters or your kids, have something waiting for them. That's who we're talking to. And that plan needs to look a little different. Consider this. I mean, if you want to scratch up some grounds for optimism, consider a couple things. One of them is tens of millions of Americans just had an up-close and personal experience with debt. Right? In their personal lives, or their family's life, or their business's life, and a huge wake-up call. And a lot of Americans looked in the mirror. They probably knew they were sort of acting recklessly anyway. Many of them. I think a lot of them thought to themselves, Grandpa was right. And their behavior has changed. Savings is up, consumption is down. I don't think it's a blip. I think people have adjusted their thinking about this, and they can translate that to the way their government is behaving. Maybe even more important. The idea of bifurcating these plans and preserving the, let's call it old plan, but starting something new, there isn't anything remotely radical about that. How many businesses in this room have been through exactly that, right? It's happened all over America. Tens of millions of Americans have already seen it. One day the actuary, toddled into the CFO's office and said, look at this, and then they toddled down the hall to the CEO's office, and eventually they went to the board and said, you know what, that old plan of ours is going tilt. And so legally, you froze that in place, but you started a new one. We have an old teachers and a new teachers plan in the state of Indiana, for instance. So I don't think it's impossible to have this discussion, but you know, we better find out.
You're right. You're right. It just needs a better language as you're describing it.
You have to be on the offensive about these things. I mean, assertive is what I really mean.
Yeah, exactly.
No reason to be defensive about this. I mean, stop and think about it. I always tell people the greatest enemies of Social Security and Medicare are the people who are telling you we can just keep them the way they are. They are going to implode.
Exactly.
And they're going to take the economy down with them. And there's no need for that to happen. We can make changes that will preserve them and renew them in a fashion that is sustainable for the future. We don't have to back up an inch. I was telling somebody earlier today, I was remembering about, I had a friend in Indiana, I don't know why he did this, but he raised wolves on his property. That's a strange friend. And I said, Phil, what's it like? I said, he said, I'll get in there in a pen and play with them. They're fun. He said, they'll come jump right up on you, put their paws right here. You know, I said, and he said, you can feel them pushing on you like this with their front paws. He said, the only rule is don't back up. Then they eat you, right? So I said, okay, I know what that's like. I used to deal with the White House press corps. But I think these issues we're talking about are a little about like, there is no reason to back up. You know, I think our vocabulary, our appeal has got to be, we are here to save the safety net.
Yeah.
Those folks are, and what they're telling you is taking us right over Niagara Falls.
Yeah.
And we don't want to let that happen. You know, if we don't address these problems, and I think time is short. At least there's enough risk of not a gradual, but a very sudden setback because of all this that I don't think there's a lot of time to waste. And if we don't address them, no one will get it. Who gets it in the neck the worst when there's an economic catastrophe? Poor people and low-income people and people on the first rung of life's ladder. We got to be very, very explicit. They're the folks we're thinking about. I mean, I say to audiences home all the time, our policy in Indiana, to tell you the truth, we're proud of the successful people in this state, but our job in public life is not to see that wealthy people make any more money. It's to see that people without any money have a chance to make some, become wealthy maybe one day. And that's what we're about. And I think that's what we have to be about nationally.
William McGurn had an interesting article in this morning's Wall Street Journal. He talked about, right now, Obama is riding the crest internationally with the killing of Osama bin Laden, the more aggressive stance that he's taken both with Afghanistan and now Libya. None of the Republicans, according to what McGurn was saying, are really talking about international. It's all focused on domestic. And they said unless they bring the conversation around what they would do in the international arena, he doesn't see them winning. Your thoughts?
I read it. I'm not sure I agree with him. I mean, first of all, it's perfectly fair to say that any national campaign is obligated to speak forthrightly about international issues. I assume that'll happen. But I can remember times when Republicans, to their detriment, looked indifferent to the pressures on middle-class and low-income families and on economic problems in the country. And frankly, those are, I think, the larger problems. You know, I'm as happy as anybody. Full credit to the administration, president on down, for this success yesterday. But I don't think it will change materially the debate in the country, not for very long. Gas is still $4, and unemployment is still 8.8. And I don't think the next year and a half looks very good. I wouldn't, as a governor, I get up every day hoping for good economic news. Believe me, I do. The kind that might re-elect the president, because I want our state to prosper and get back to the boom we were in just a couple, 3 years ago. But I don't see it. I see more downside bias, as they say, than upside in this economy. We can all name the shoes that can still drop. So I think the debate rightly centers there, and I'll give you one last reason. To me, mastering our economic, getting an answer to our economic situation is a national security issue. I'm not the only one that thinks so. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs has said as much too. I was a card-carrying member of 2 administrations that practiced with the policy of peace through strength, and it was right. It was vindicated in both cases. But if we go broke, we won't have strength, and ultimately we may not have much peace, and no one will follow us in the world. We are now borrowing more than the entire defense budget, right? It's an odd situation. Our borrowing is really twice the defense budget. We're borrowing, and half of that's been from the Chinese. Not going to go on much longer. You can basically say we're borrowing the defense budget from the Chinese, who might be our adversaries one day. That doesn't sound like a very stable situation to me. That's the thing, I said, that back in the Revolution, the Hessians at least they got paid cash. they didn't borrow the money, Right. So, I read Mr. McGurn's article. I know what he's saying, and his heart is in the right place, but I think it is entirely appropriate for our principal concern to be on how do we get this economy growing at the kind of rate it's going to take. We haven't talked about that yet. How do we get this economy growing at a sustained rate that gives us a chance to pay our bills, manage our debts? How do we change these programs? There's the kind of changes we're talking about. Medicare and Social Security don't do anything for the deficit now, or very minor, but they would send a clear message to the world and ourselves that we don't intend to go bankrupt as a country. And I think we would preserve enough confidence then that the world would continue to invest in the United States. So there'll be plenty of time and plenty of validity in what he says about the need to address these other questions, but big issues are right back here. Yeah, Jane.
With a conservative administration, would we be able to drill for oil, or is that just so gummed up?
We'd be a lot more able to drill. I think, as far as I know, there are no legal constraints on an administration that wanted to. Reopening offshore, reopening the Gulf, reopening Alaska, and these forbidden places. So I think you'd see a big change. I think the big issue there, best I understand it, is the long time frames. If you made that decision today, you wouldn't get the first drop of oil for quite a while. But that is not an argument for not doing it. Yes, of course we should do this, both for economic reasons. We ought to be paying ourselves for energy, even at a small premium. I think at some reasonable premium. Better to pay ourselves, have those dollars circulating in our economy, than to pay somebody else, let alone bad guys. And so there's a national security aspect to it too. Please.
I think I was wondering your take on the debt ceiling. I see the argument, although it's getting a lot of play in the mainstream media, is kind of a red herring. The debt ceiling is almost a totally pulled out of the air number. My concern is the bond market is ultimately going to determine what our debt ceiling is. But I don't see anyone on the Republican side really getting that message out there right now. The debt ceiling is fantastic. It could be 30 trillion. It doesn't really matter. When people eventually stop lending us money, we are going to be in a corner. And all I hear the argument on the left to that is that, Krugman in the New York Times would say, well, interest rates are low now. Well, that's what Greece said too. I mean, these things switch on a dime. Argentina tumbled under the same kind of economic situation we have. And I don't hear anybody out there talking about how the number, it's almost a fictitious number. It's irrelevant.
Well, I think Andy help you out.
He's doing a great
He's 3
job.
feet away. He's in the
He's doing a great job.
and he gets it. No, I think what you're saying is right. I defer to Andy. I have nothing to offer about the tactics of it all. I mean, we have this convention in our politics in which the Treasury is forbidden to go out and roll over debt after a certain point, which is legally forbidden. I mean, you're right. The ceiling that matters is the one the markets will eventually impose. That's the one to really keep your eye on. This is a sort of a governmental convention that we've embraced over our history here. I'm sort of glad it's there. I know this is a terribly arduous business for Andy and his colleagues, but it does provide a leverage point for making at least the beginnings of change. And I just think I commend them. They've been standing in strong and using that advantage. So, you know, hold on tight and get us as much as you can, Andy. Yes, sir, in the back.
I'm going to ask a question about trade. Right now, a lot of jobs have gone overseas and companies are relocating outside of our borders. I'm from a very small town in North Carolina. I want to say thank you for coming up here very much. And I'm very concerned about manufacturing jobs in America and reinvesting in those and reinvesting in the next generation to say that it's all right if you have a father or grandfather or a second generation that wants to go off to, say, a factory job.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. And to think of where the president whose award you received is not what his father was in education. He wasn't a Wall Street guy, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it was very humble means that helped to make America great by people investing in America.
Yeah, I appreciate this question very much. I happen to live in the most manufacturing intensive state in the country. That is to say, manufacturing a bigger percentage of our jobs, bigger percentage of our income in Indiana than anywhere. And we're proud of it. And although our economic strategy has absolutely been to diversify and add new jobs in other sectors so we're not so dependent, we're never going to let go of our commitment to manufacturing. As you say, it provides solid, family-supporting jobs for people who might not be suited to the world of high finance or information technology and so forth. And plus, I'm going to tell you, I'm an optimist about this too. Again, we got to make the right decision. I can give you a long list of companies that have dabbled overseas and found out the grass is not so very green. But, you know, first of all, the cost differential is not quite so big as it used to be. Dollars helping there, but it's not just that. Costs are rising in China and places like this. Secondly, they've had a lot of companies that have big quality problems. You know, I talked to somebody, you know, one year they say, well, you know what, the engineers in Mexico only cost half as much. They come back and say they only know a quarter as much. And we're seeing some strength, by the way. What little strength this economy is right now is manifesting is primarily in manufacturing. And the trade balance has come back in line a little bit, almost entirely because of exports, and those are manufacturing exports. So, but unfortunately, this administration has pursued a policy that is almost without exception anti-growth and very anti-manufacturing. I mean, this obsession with CO2, I'm sorry. You know, I don't know. I don't know for sure what effect CO2, man-made CO2, has or doesn't have on a thermometer. And they don't either. But I do know this, that the policies that have recommended that they tried to move through Congress, and now they're trying to muscle through the EPA, are death for manufacturing. And they will not move the world thermometer by their own computer models. This is my beef with the whole climate change business. You don't have to reach the question of is CO2 the culprit to know that it's dumb to impose massive, immediate, and certain costs on this economy, on manufacturing more than any other area, in pursuit of infinitesimal, distant, and highly uncertain gains in terms of climate. Their own computer model, if they really believe that thing, says you do all that stuff they want to do, and the temperature in 50 years changes by a fraction of a degree. It's not a very good bargain. Oh, well, I get 3 in a row. We'll go from back to front, so yeah.
Governor, the audience might stone me tonight, but I want you to know I'm not the only, you're not the only Colts fan in the crowd tonight.
Oh.
My name is David Fry. My older brother Randy is a freshman.
Yes, he is. He had a very good session. You're Randy Fry's brother?
Yes, his much younger brother.
You ought to be very I'll tell him you put it just that way.
My question is, I understand that the Indiana General Assembly was able to defund Planned Parenthood in this last session. And my question is, how was the General Assembly able to do that when they perhaps weren't in previous years? And secondly, how will that change the child killing industry in Indiana?
Well, they did it by a very large, by a bipartisan majority of better than 2 to 1 in both houses. It happened in the last week or two of the session. It was an amendment to a bill I supported that I think extends the protection of life in our state in a very meaningful way. It was already a very strong bill. It was going to move the last date it will move the last date for abortion from 22 weeks to 20, which is consistent with the advance of science. It will further inform the woman's choice. Choice is the law of the land, but I don't understand an argument in favor of uninformed choice, and so we've done several things while I was governor that further deepen the information given to women, and this has to do with the pain that the unborn fetus feels. To that bill was attached this prohibition, and as I said, it passed with very, very large margins, and with lots of Democrats as well as Republicans voting for it, and I'm going to sign it. There was an assertion, there is an assertion that it would lead to some loss of services. So I had that very carefully checked. I wanted to know before saying anything, and it's groundless. There's an enormous array of alternative providers. In the event that the affected organizations, Planned Parenthood's the biggest, but not the only one, in the event that the affected organizations choose to continue with providing abortion surgery and not separating that from their other option, that's another choice they have. If they don't do that, then we will make sure every Medicaid, this is what we're talking about, Medicaid beneficiary knows all her other options. And there were many in every county. There were 800 alternate providers in the 28 counties that would be affected, where there's a Planned Parenthood place now. So, it wasn't in honesty, it was not my proposal, but it's the will of the people of our state, it's the will of the legislature, and it is consistent with the public health. There's still a couple more, yes, sir.
South Carolina, could you briefly talk about your thoughts on the debate there, the primary there, and some of the issues there?
I don't know anything about any of that. I mean, I know where South Carolina is. Charleston's the capital. Let me see what else. Palmetto State. To be honest, I don't know when the event is. And I'm not. So I'm sorry. I'm not being that evasive here. But if your question implies a degree of forethought and commitment that I haven't reached yet in terms of running for national office, so I'm not conning you. I don't know when I know the South Carolina primary is early, but I don't know anything about the time between here and there, or have not been there, haven't been to
We thought you were going to announce here, that's why you came.
I see. I appreciate the opportunity. I think I've got some women to check with at home first, though. Sir.
Governor, Charles Crowder had a column recently, maybe you saw it, it was in the Washington Post, April 22nd, in which he evaluated the Republican potential candidates presidential for 2012. Of you, he said in part, very briefly, he said, Mitch Daniels, highly successful governor, budget guru. And then he seemed to maybe poke a little hole into you by saying foreign policy unknown, assuming he has one. For those of us here who like you, would you like to speak to that and give us some ammunition for your foreign policy background?
All right. Well, first thing to say is that increasingly, and it didn't happen until fairly recently, but why would anybody care what the governor of Indiana thinks? But increasingly, people have asked some questions, and I sometimes facetiously, or not so facetiously, say, you know, Indiana doesn't have foreign policy. This is not so much just a matter of ducking as a way of saying, one, I'm not a candidate for anything yet, so I don't really feel obligated, and it may not even be appropriate for me to mouth off about these things. Number two, I do subscribe to the old-fashioned theory of a loyal opposition, and that implies certain duties. You know, they had me do the little Saturday response to the radio address about a year ago, and they didn't give me any guidance what to talk about. So I talked a little bit about what being in the loyal opposition means. And to me, at least, it implies, along with the duty of expressing honest disagreement, it also implies, I think, a duty to express any agreement that may be there. So, for instance, this administration doesn't go as far as we did, but they're pretty good on education change. Teacher quality, charter schools, and so forth. And it implies the old concept of the water's edge and having and supporting the commander-in-chief, certainly when military operations are involved, and being careful, at least judicious about your criticism. Now, you're asking a perfectly fair question, what's my general outlook on the world? And I'll tell you that, I mean, you know something about it if you know the two administrations that I served in, Reagan and Bush 43. And I was happy and quite comfortable with the foreign policy that they both produced. I will say, and have before, that the policies of one era may not necessarily be the right policies for the next. I think we have to be very, I already said here, if we mismanage our fiscal affairs, it'll have catastrophic effects on our ability to influence events in the world. I mean, the world's already begun disregarding the United States in a variety of ways. I was traveling in Asia last fall. Every single day, I started saving it, but every day, a different Asian country was politely saying, we don't care what you think about currency, we don't care what you think about, these trade deals. You saw recently over in the Gulf, you saw the administration, the president say to the Saudis, stay out of Bahrain, they're paying attention. So we will have to, I believe, show a mastery of our economic fate and our fiscal fate to maintain influence in the world, or eventually to have the resources, the military resources, to project that influence when we need to do so. So I think it is a time for some reflection. I think we ought to constantly be evaluating the missions that we ask our military to take on. The one thing that's completely unacceptable is to tell the military, we want you to do everything you're doing now with less money. That is simply, that cannot be the answer. And my viewpoint, as in almost all matters, I'm with Churchill. He once said that the duty of national security requires no compromise and no mandate. It is the first duty for which governments are brought into existence. He's right, of course. So, if on examination there's a case that each and every mission that we have currently undertaken all over the world is essential to the physical or economic security of the country, argument's over. But it cannot be illegitimate to ask that question, I don't think, at a time in which we are as strapped financially as we are now.